Hey guys, tonight we begin with a look at another storied franchise, this time the San Francisco Giants. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you, and which other franchises you'd like to explore, baseball or otherwise. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. There is something about the fog rolling in from the Pacific that makes you understand why stories begin here. It moves like memory itself, slow, inevitable, shrouding the familiar until it becomes something else entirely. The fog knows this city's secrets, knows how it transforms things, how it can take a team born in the canyons of Manhattan and make it belong to these rolling hills, these windswept shores, where the continent runs out of land and dreams have nowhere to go but up. The San Francisco Giants. Even their name carries weight, suggests something mythic, something larger than the sum of its parts. But before they were giants of the West, before they belonged to a city perched on the edge of America, they were something else entirely. They were the New York Giants, children of a different coast, born in the shadow of different buildings, under different skies. Let me take you back to 1883, when the world was still discovering what baseball could be, when the game was younger, wilder, less polished, but somehow more pure. Picture New York in that gilded age, horse-drawn carriages clattering over cobblestones, gas lamps flickering to life as dusk settled over a city drunk on its own ambition. It was here, in this fevered landscape of steel and stone and endless possibility, that the New York Gothams took their first breath. They were not yet giants then. That name would come later, in 1885, when manager Jim Mutry, watching his players take the field with a kind of paternal pride, would declare them his giants. These towering figures in wool uniforms, these men who seemed to dwarf not just their opponents, but the very game itself. The name stuck, as names do when they capture something true about their bearer, something essential and undeniable. Those early years in New York were a kind of baptism by fire. The game was rougher then, played on fields that were more suggestion than certainty, where a bad hop could break your jaw, and arguments were settled with fists as often as words. The Giants learned to play hard and mean, developed a swagger that would define them for decades to come. They were New Yorkers, after all, and New Yorkers don't apologize for taking up space. John McGraw arrived in 1902 like a force of nature, a man who understood that baseball was as much about the mind as the body, as much about intimidation as talent. McGraw was small in stature but enormous in presence, the kind of man who could make grown men feel like children with nothing more than a glance. Under his guidance, the Giants became something fearsome and beautiful, a team that played with the precision of a pocket watch and the ferocity of wolves. The early decades of the 20th century belonged to them. They won pennants like other teams won games, with a casual dominance that made their success seem inevitable. Names echoed through the concrete canyons of Manhattan. Christy Mathewson, whose fastball was poetry in motion. Iron Man McGinnity, who pitched with the endurance of machinery. Chief Myers, whose steady presence behind the plate anchored teams that seemed to float above the competition. But listen closely, and you can hear it even then. The first whispers of wanderlust, the subtle pull of the Pacific. Baseball was growing, spreading like wildfire across a continent that was still discovering its own dimensions. The West Coast called, not just with its promise of gold and sunshine, but with something deeper: the chance to plant roots in virgin soil, to be first rather than merely best. By the 1950s, those whispers had become a roar. The Polo Grounds, that grand old cathedral of baseball, was showing its age. The neighborhood around it was changing, and attendance was dwindling. The Giants found themselves in the peculiar position of being successful but unwanted, kings of a realm that no longer seemed to value royalty. When Walter O'Malley convinced Horace Stoneham to move west together, the Dodgers to Los Angeles, the Giants to San Francisco, it felt less like betrayal than inevitable evolution. Picture, if you will, that moment of departure. The last game at the Polo Grounds in 1957, played before a sparse crowd that seemed to rattle around that enormous space like coins in an empty jar. The players took their positions one final time on that oddly shaped field, with its impossibly deep center field and cozy foul territory, not knowing they were participating in a kind of funeral. When the final out was recorded, when the last fan had shuffled toward the exit, something died that day. Not just the New York Giants, but a particular kind of innocence, a belief that some things were permanent, unchangeable, sacred, and then rebirth. The 1958 season opened not in the familiar confines of Manhattan, but in a temporary home called Seals Stadium. A minor league park pressed into service while the city built something grander. San Francisco embraced its new team with the enthusiasm of the newly converted. Here was a city that understood reinvention, that had built itself from nothing after the great earthquake and fire of 1906, that specialized in making the impossible seem routine. The fog rolled in during those early games, thick and mysterious, transforming routine fly balls into adventures, reducing visibility to mere suggestions. Players disappeared and reappeared like figures in a dream. The fans didn't mind. They were getting Major League Baseball for the first time, and weather was just another character in the drama, another element to master. Candlestick Park opened in 1960, rising from the windswept mud flats of Candlestick Point like some modernist vision of what a ballpark could be. It was beautiful in its own way, this concrete bowl perched on the edge of the bay. But beauty and comfort are not always synonymous. The wind howled through its corridors with the persistence of memory, turning routine pop-ups into geometric puzzles, making every game a negotiation between human skill and natural force. The players learned to adapt. They had to. Juan Marichal developed a high leg kick that seemed designed to fight the wind, turning his delivery into a kind of dance with the elements. Orlando Cepeda anchored first base like a monument, solid and unmovable even when the stadium itself seemed to sway. Willie McCovey's swing cut through the air with such authority that even Candlestick's notorious gusts seemed to step aside in respect. But it was Willie Mays who truly made the park his own, who transformed its challenges into opportunities for transcendence. Watch him track a fly ball in the swirling winds of Candlestick, and you understand something fundamental about grace under pressure. The ball would hang in the air, buffeted by cross-currents that seemed determined to embarrass mortal men, and Mays would simply adjust, compensate, arrive at the precise spot where physics and destiny intersected. The catch would look effortless, inevitable, as if the ball had always been destined for his glove. Those were golden years, though perhaps we only recognize them as such in retrospect. The early 1960s Giants were a collection of talents so diverse and abundant that they seemed less like a team than a greatest hits compilation of baseball itself. There was Willie Mays, of course, the Say Hey kid, whose combination of power, speed, and joy redefined what baseball could be. McCovey provided thunder from the left side, his home runs carrying such authority that they seemed to part the fog itself. Marichal was poetry in motion, his high leg, kick, and pinpoint control making him virtually unhittable when he was right, which was most of the time. The 1962 season crystallized everything beautiful and heartbreaking about those Giants teams. They won 103 games, playing with a kind of fluid excellence that made baseball look like an art form. The pennant race with the Dodgers went down to the wire, then beyond, requiring a 3-game playoff that seemed to last forever and end too soon. When the Giants finally won, when they finally earned the right to face the Yankees in the World Series, it felt like vindication of their long journey west. Proof that they belonged on this coast, in this city, under these impossible skies. The World Series itself was a 7-game epic that compressed a lifetime of emotion into a single October. It was Willie Mays versus Mickey Mantle, experience against tradition, West Coast innovation battling East Coast establishment. Game 7 came down to the bottom of the ninth, 2 outs, Willie McCovey at the plate representing the tying run. The count worked to his favor. The crowd rose to its feet, and McCovey unleashed one of his thunderous line drives toward right field. For a moment that lasted forever, the ball hung in the autumn air like possibility itself. It had the trajectory of a double, maybe more, the kind of laser that would score multiple runs and give the Giants their first championship in San Francisco. But Bobby Richardson, the Yankees' second baseman, was standing exactly where fate had positioned him, and the ball found his glove with the cruel precision of destiny denied. The series was over. The championship belonged to New York again. The heartbreak of that moment would echo through decades, but it also established something crucial about the Giants' identity. They were not just a baseball team. They were a testament to the beautiful futility of hope, the necessary courage required to dream in the face of repeated disappointment. San Francisco understood this intimately. It was a city built on fault lines, after all, where every day was an act of faith in the face of geological uncertainty. The late 1960s and early 1970s were a kind of purgatory, years when individual brilliance couldn't mask organizational decline. Mays aged with grace but inevitable diminishment, his running catches becoming more calculated, his stolen bases fewer but somehow more meaningful. McCovey continued to hit towering home runs that seemed to bend the laws of physics, but the team around him was fragmenting, losing coherence like a song played too slowly. Then came the darkness. The 1970s and 1980s were wilderness years, decades when the Giants seemed to exist primarily to remind their fans that baseball, like life, promises nothing but the opportunity to try again tomorrow. There were individual moments of brilliance. Jack Clark's prodigious power, Will Clark's sweet swing, Kevin Mitchell's unlikely MVP season, but no sustained excellence. No playoff appearances, no reason for hope beyond the stubborn faith that eventually, inevitably, things would have to get better. Candlestick Park became a punchline during those years, the butt of jokes about wind and cold, and the apparent impossibility of creating a comfortable baseball environment on the San Francisco Peninsula. Players complained about the conditions. Visiting teams dreaded their trips west, and attendance dwindled to levels that made the sparse crowds of the final Polo Grounds years look robust by comparison. But something interesting happens when a team suffers long enough. The fans who remain become something more than fans. They become witnesses, keepers of faith, believers in the face of overwhelming evidence that their belief is misplaced. The Giants developed a cult following during those lean years, supporters who showed up not because they expected victory, but because they understood that loyalty isn't contingent on success, that love, real love, persists through decades of disappointment. The 1989 season felt different from the beginning. It was as if the baseball gods, tired of ignoring San Francisco, had suddenly remembered that the Giants existed and decided to sprinkle a little magic onto Candlestick Point. Will Clark was playing like a man possessed, his line drives screaming through the marine layer with laser-like precision. Kevin Mitchell was having a season that defied explanation, hitting home runs from positions that shouldn't have allowed for home runs, driving in runs with a casual authority that suggested he'd been saving up power for years. The team clicked in ways that transcended individual talent. They played with the kind of chemistry that can't be manufactured, only discovered, a collective understanding that emerged from years of shared struggle. When they clinched the National League West, when the drought finally ended after 7 barren years, Candlestick Park erupted with a joy that seemed to shake the very foundations of the peninsula. The National League Championship Series against the Chicago Cubs was everything playoff baseball should be. Tension stretched to the breaking point, individual moments of brilliance, the kind of drama that makes ordinary people believe in destiny. Will Clark's performance in that series transcended mere baseball. It was artistic expression through athletic achievement, each at-bat a masterpiece of concentration and execution. When the Giants finally won, when they earned their first World Series appearance in 27 years, it felt like more than baseball. It felt like resurrection. And then came October 17th, 1989. Game 3 of the World Series, Candlestick Park filled with anticipation, the city's attention focused on 9 innings of baseball that would determine whether this magical season would conclude with the ultimate prize. At 5:04 p.m., 17 minutes before the scheduled first pitch, the Earth itself decided to write a different story. The Loma Prieta earthquake lasted only 15 seconds, but it changed everything. The stadium swayed like a ship in rough seas, light fixtures swung like pendulums, and 62,000 people suddenly found themselves participants in something far more serious than a baseball game. The series was postponed. The city turned its attention to more pressing concerns, and when baseball finally resumed 10 days later, the momentum had shifted along with the tectonic plates beneath the Bay Area. The Athletics swept the final 2 games, claiming a championship that felt oddly hollow given the circumstances. The Giants had lost more than a World Series. They had lost their moment, their perfect season interrupted by forces beyond human control or comprehension. It was the kind of cosmic irony that seemed to define their existence. Another reminder that in San Francisco, even triumph comes with an asterisk. The 1990s brought new struggles and familiar disappointments. The team remained competitive, but never quite good enough, always falling short of the ultimate goal in ways that seemed specifically designed to break their supporters' hearts. The franchise's future in San Francisco became uncertain, with ownership exploring relocation options and fans wondering if their loyalty would ultimately be rewarded with abandonment. Candlestick Park was crumbling, literally and figuratively. The wind still howled through its corridors, but now it seemed to carry whispers of departure rather than promises of glory. The sight of that concrete bowl, half empty during losing streaks, became a symbol of civic and sporting futility. Something had to change, or the Giants would become another casualty of Major League Baseball's relentless pursuit of newer, better, more profitable venues. Salvation came in an unexpected form, a ballpark that would rise from the industrial wasteland of China Basin, a facility that would embrace rather than fight the natural beauty of its setting. When Pacific Bell Park opened in 2000, later to be renamed SBC Park, then AT&T Park, and finally Oracle Park, it felt like the Giants were finally coming home, not just to a new stadium, but to their true identity as a San Francisco institution. The ballpark was everything Candlestick wasn't: intimate rather than cavernous, beautiful rather than merely functional, designed to showcase the game rather than fight against it. Wright Field opened onto San Francisco Bay, where kayakers would gather in McCovey Cove hoping to retrieve home run balls. The fog still rolled in, but now it seemed like atmosphere rather than adversity, another character in the ongoing drama rather than an unwelcome intrusion. Barry Bonds arrived that same year, returning home to the city where he'd been born and raised, the son of Giants legend Bobby Bonds coming full circle in ways that seemed scripted by destiny itself. Bonds was already great, already a certain Hall of Famer, but something about that new ballpark, that homecoming, elevated his game to levels that transcended traditional measurement. The early 2000s belonged to Bonds in ways that few individual seasons ever belonged to a single player. He didn't just hit home runs, he redefined what home runs could be, sending baseballs into the bay with such regularity that the kayakers developed specialized equipment for retrieving them. His 73 home runs in 2001 broke a record that had seemed unbreakable, but more than the number was the way he achieved it, with a kind of casual dominance that suggested he could hit 80 if he really tried. But individual brilliance, as the Giants had learned repeatedly over the decades, doesn't guarantee team success. Bonds would never win a World Series in San Francisco, never experience the ultimate validation that his talent deserved. The teams around him ranged from mediocre to competitive, but never quite championship caliber, never quite good enough to carry him to the mountaintop he'd spent his entire career climbing toward. Still, those Bonds years gave Giants fans something they'd been lacking for decades, a reason to believe that anything was possible on any given night. When he stepped into the batter's box, the entire stadium held its breath, waiting to witness something that would be talked about for years. He made Oracle Park into a pilgrimage site, a place where baseball fans from around the world would come to witness greatness in its purest form. The post-Bonds era began with familiar uncertainty. The team struggled to find its identity without their superstar, cycling through players and strategies like a franchise searching for its soul. The beautiful ballpark remained, the loyal fans endured, but the magic seemed to have departed with their departed slugger. The Giants were competitive but not special, good but not great, the kind of team that fills a season without creating lasting memories. And then, almost without warning, everything changed. The 2010 season arrived with modest expectations. This was a team built around pitching and defense, fundamentals rather than fireworks. Tim Lincecum had emerged as an unlikely ace, his slight frame generating power that defied physics, his curveball dropping through the marine layer like a controlled crash. Buster Posey arrived from the minor leagues looking like the answer to prayers Giants fans hadn't known they were praying. But it was the collective chemistry that made that season special, a group of players who complemented each other in ways that couldn't be predicted or manufactured. Pablo Sandoval, provided joyful power from unexpected places. Aubrey Huff anchored the lineup with professional at-bats that seemed to make everyone around him better. Edgar Renteria, a journeyman shortstop playing what might be his final season, suddenly rediscovered the clutch gene that had defined his younger years. The playoff run that followed felt like destiny unwinding in real time. Every series brought new heroes, unexpected moments of brilliance from players who had never experienced postseason pressure. When they finally reached the World Series, when they finally got their chance to win it all, they faced the Texas Rangers in what should have been a competitive series, but felt more like an inevitability playing out. Game 1 belonged to Renteria, whose 2 home runs announced that this was his tournament, his moment to shine on the biggest stage. The series that followed was a masterclass in pitching and defense, the kind of fundamental baseball that Lincecum and the starting rotation had been perfecting all season. When the final out was recorded, when 56 years of waiting finally ended, Oracle Park and the entire city erupted with a joy that seemed to have been building for decades. The championship parade down Market Street drew hundreds of thousands of fans, a river of orange and black that flowed through the heart of the city like celebration made manifest. These were fans who remembered the lean years, who had suffered through decades of disappointment, who understood that this moment was precious precisely because it had seemed so unlikely for so long. 2 years later, they did it again. The 2012 season was even more improbable. A team that barely made the playoffs suddenly playing with supernatural confidence once October arrived. Pablo Sandoval's 3 home run performance in Game 1 of the World Series against Detroit was the kind of individual brilliance that becomes legendary. Each swing more thunderous than the last, each ball disappearing into the Detroit night like a statement of intent. That series ended with a sweep, 4 games of dominance that announced the Giants as a dynasty in the making. The second parade was even larger than the first, the city embracing its team with the enthusiasm of converts who had discovered religion. These weren't just baseball games anymore. They were community events, opportunities for an entire region to come together and celebrate something pure and beautiful in an increasingly complicated world. The 2014 championship completed what felt like a trilogy, another even-year miracle that reinforced the Giants' reputation as October specialists. This time, the path to glory wound through a wild-card game that lasted 18 innings, the kind of marathon that tests not just talent, but endurance, commitment, the willingness to outlast rather than simply outplay your opponent. Madison Bumgarner emerged as the defining figure of that postseason, a young pitcher who seemed to grow larger with each October appearance, whose fastball carried the weight of franchise history. The World Series against Kansas City was a 7-game classic that showcased everything beautiful about baseball. Pitching duels, timely hitting, defensive gems, the kind of chess match between managers that makes every decision feel consequential. Bumgarner's performance in the final game was the stuff of legend. 5 innings of shutout relief on 2 days' rest, the ball jumping from his hand with the authority of a man who understood that some moments define entire careers. 3 championships in 5 years transformed the Giants from lovable losers into a legitimate dynasty. Oracle Park was no longer just beautiful. It was historic, a venue where greatness had been achieved repeatedly, where fans could point to specific seats and remember specific moments that had changed the trajectory of franchise history. The fog rolling in from the Pacific still created atmospheric drama, But now it seemed more like stage dressing for theater than an obstacle to overcome. Those championship years also established the Giants' identity as a franchise that understood the relationship between tradition and innovation. They honored their past, retiring numbers, celebrating legends, maintaining connections to the New York years and the early San Francisco decades, while simultaneously embracing new approaches to player development, analytics, and fan engagement. It was a delicate balance, respecting history while refusing to be imprisoned by it. The post-2014 years brought new challenges and familiar cycles. Key players aged, departed, or declined. Young prospects failed to develop as expected. The farm system that had produced championship cores needed time to restock and rebuild. The Giants found themselves in the uncomfortable position of trying to maintain championship standards with a roster that was no longer championship caliber. But something fundamental had changed in the relationship between the team and its city. The championships had created a reservoir of goodwill that sustained the franchise through inevitable down cycles. Fans who had waited 56 years for their first title were more patient with temporary setbacks, more understanding that sustained excellence requires periods of rebuilding. The organization had earned credibility that couldn't be diminished by a few disappointing seasons. Oracle Park continued to evolve, adding features and amenities that enhanced the fan experience while preserving the intimate atmosphere that made it special. The view beyond right field remained constant. Kayakers in the Bay Bridge spanning the horizon, the city skyline providing a backdrop that reminded everyone that this was more than just a baseball game. This was San Francisco baseball, with all the poetry and possibility that phrase implies. The rivalries, too, had deepened and evolved over the decades. The relationship with the Los Angeles Dodgers carried forward all the animosity from their Brooklyn days, intensified by geographic proximity and cultural differences between Northern and California. When the Giants and Dodgers played, it wasn't just about baseball. It was about identity, about which coast better understood what the game could mean to a community. Games between these teams carried extra weight, drew larger crowds, generated more passion than routine matchups. The fans understood the history, the decades of competition that stretched back to when both teams called New York home. Every pitch mattered not just for its immediate impact, but for its place in an ongoing narrative that had been building for generations. The Oakland Athletics provided a different kind of rivalry. The cross-bay tension that comes from sharing a metropolitan area without sharing an identity. The Battle of the Bay series, interrupted by the 1989 earthquake, had established these teams as geographic neighbors with distinct personalities. The A's represented efficiency and innovation, the Giants' tradition and atmosphere. When they played, it was a referendum on different approaches to building a baseball franchise. But perhaps the most important relationship was between the Giants and their city. San Francisco had claimed this team as its own, in ways that transcended mere civic loyalty. The Giants were woven into the cultural fabric of the Bay Area, part of the collective identity of a region that prided itself on being different, on approaching familiar things in unfamiliar ways. Going to Giants games became a rite of passage, a way to participate in something larger than yourself while remaining distinctly individual. The fog became part of the mythology, that marine layer rolling in from the Pacific like punctuation in the middle of sentences. Players learned to time their swings to account for the moisture in the air. Fielders developed instincts for how visibility would change between innings. Fans brought jackets to summer games, understanding that San Francisco's weather operated according to its own logic, indifferent to calendar dates or reasonable expectations. Oracle Park's design celebrated this uniqueness rather than fighting against it. The architects had understood something fundamental about San Francisco, that its beauty came from embracing rather than controlling natural forces, from working with the landscape rather than imposing artificial order upon it. The ballpark felt organic, as if it had grown from the shoreline rather than being constructed on top of it. The food reflected the city's culinary sophistication, elevating ballpark dining from hot dogs and peanuts to a showcase of regional ingredients and local talent. Garlic fries became a signature dish, their aroma mixing with salt air to create an olfactory experience unique to this venue. Local restaurants established outposts throughout the concourses, making every Giants game an opportunity to sample the best the Bay Area had to offer. The franchise's commitment to social responsibility also reflected San Francisco values. The Giants were early adopters of environmental sustainability practices, installing solar panels, reducing waste, partnering with local organizations to make Oracle Park a model for how sports facilities could operate as responsible community partners. These weren't just public relations gestures. They were genuine expressions of shared values between the team and its supporters. Player development became an organizational obsession, a recognition that in a market like San Francisco, expensive, demanding, sophisticated, sustained success required building from within rather than purchasing from without. The Giants invested heavily in their farm system, in international scouting, in the kind of infrastructure that produces championship-caliber talent year after year. It was a long-term approach that required patience and commitment, qualities that the organization had learned through decades of disappointment. The analytics revolution transformed how the Giants evaluated players and constructed rosters, but they managed to integrate new methodologies without losing sight of traditional scouting and instinct. It was a balanced approach that honored both data and intuition, recognizing that baseball remained fundamentally human despite increasing technological sophistication. The best decisions combined statistical analysis with old-fashioned gut feelings, creating a hybrid approach that felt distinctly Giants-like. As the franchise moved through the 2020s, new challenges emerged alongside familiar ones. The competitive landscape of Major League Baseball had changed dramatically, with larger markets enjoying advantages that seemed to grow more pronounced each season. The Giants had to be smarter, more creative, more efficient than their competitors while maintaining the cultural identity that made them special to their supporters. Oracle Park continued to age gracefully, requiring updates and improvements while preserving the elements that made it beloved. The view beyond right field remained spectacular, but the infrastructure needed constant attention to maintain the fan experience that had become synonymous with Giants baseball. It was a delicate balance between preservation and progress, honoring the past while preparing for the future. The roster continued to evolve, with new stars emerging to replace departing legends. Each generation of Giants players inherited not just uniforms and equipment, but also responsibility for continuing a tradition that stretched back through San Francisco's baseball history to the very origins of professional baseball in New York. It was a weighty inheritance, the kind of legacy that could inspire or intimidate depending on the individual's relationship with history and expectation. The fans remained constant, their loyalty deepened by championship memories, but not dependent on continued success. They filled Oracle Park on summer evenings when the fog rolled in like clockwork, when the temperature dropped 20 degrees between innings, when visiting players pulled on extra layers while Giants veterans went about their business with the casual adaptation of people who had learned to work with rather than against their environment. This, perhaps, is what makes the San Francisco Giants more than just a baseball team. They are a testament to the power of place, to the way geography and culture can shape sporting identity in ways that transcend wins and losses. They belong to their city in fundamental ways, rooted not just in location but in character, in the shared understanding that some things are worth waiting for, that patience and persistence eventually yield rewards that are all the sweeter for having been delayed. The fog still rolls in from the Pacific, still transforms routine games into atmospheric theater, still reminds everyone present that they are witnessing something unique, something that couldn't happen quite the same way anywhere else. The Giants have learned to dance with that fog, to use it as a partner rather than fight it as an opponent. In this, they mirror their city, adaptable, resilient, finding beauty in conditions that others might consider challenging. The story of the San Francisco Giants is still being written. New chapters added with each season, each game, each moment when individual excellence serves collective purpose. It is a story that began in the canyons of Manhattan, but found its truest expression on the shores of San Francisco Bay, where the continent runs out of land and dreams have nowhere to go but up, carried on the marine layer toward a sky that seems to promise, if not certainty, then at least the possibility that tomorrow might bring something wonderful. In the end, perhaps that is enough. Perhaps that has always been enough. The promise of possibility, the commitment to hope, the understanding that some stories are worth telling not because they guarantee happy endings, but because they remind us why we continue to believe in the first place. The San Francisco Giants are such a story, written in fog and sunshine, in triumph and heartbreak, in the patient faith of supporters who understand that some things, the most important things, are worth waiting for, worth believing in, worth celebrating when they finally, inevitably, magnificently arrive.